Hello everyone, and welcome to our Professional Development webinar series. There are more than 250 of us gathered here today from all over the United States and Canada. Thank you for joining us for the second presentation of the 2012-2013 Ave Maria Press Professional Development webinar series. For those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, Exploring the National Certification Process for Lay Ecclesial Ministers, with Dr. J. Michael McMahon and Christopher Anderson. This webinar is brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priests' Councils. Everyone in our audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenters using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel. Please take a moment now to find the box for typing questions on your GoToWebinar panel. Simply click the Send button on the bottom right corner to send your questions to our presenter, and I will read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. I would also like to note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you later this week via email, so please watch your inboxes. Now that we've gone through the technical information, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenters, Mike McMahon and Chris Anderson. Mike McMahon has served for the past 11 years as President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Pastoral Musicians, and also continues to serve in part-time parish music ministry at St. Agnes Parish in Arlington, Virginia. Mike received his Doctor of Ministry degree from the Catholic University of America and a master's degree in liturgical studies from the University of Notre Dame. He was a member of the steering committee formed by 5 national Catholic organizations for developing common standards and procedures for certification of lay ecclesial ministry and submitting them for approval to the USCCB Commission on Certification and Accreditation. Christopher Anderson is the Executive Director of the National Association for Lay Ministry. Prior to joining NALM in 2003, Chris served as the Associate Director of National Conference for Catechetical Leadership. He also was with the Office for Religious Education in the Archdiocese of Chicago and began his ministry as a Parish Director of Religious Education at St. John the Baptist in rural Greenville, New York, Diocese of Albany. He too was a member of the steering committee formed by 5 national Catholic organizations for developing common standards and procedures for certification of lay ecclesial ministry and submitting them for approval to the USCCB Commission on Certification and Accreditation. Mike and Chris, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Are you all ready?
Hi, Jared. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. This is Chris Anderson. I'm going to begin us today, and Michael's going to pull up the PowerPoint while I'm getting us to do that. But just wanted to give you a quick overview today that we are going to start by talking and providing an overview for the new national certification standards, the process, and the national standards themselves. We're also going to give you a context for those standards and procedures, and a little bit of a brief history lesson, and a little bit of an acronym lesson, because we can't do anything in the church unless we all do our appropriate acronyms. So let us begin by first talking about a choice we made not to use an acronym. The standards are brought to you by the Alliance for Certification for Lay Ecclesial Ministers. It is purposely being called the Alliance. It was a decision that we weren't going to add another acronym to our list of acronyms, and that we would simply refer to ourselves as the Alliance. Throughout the presentation today and on the website and the materials relating to certification, you'll find that we'll simply see that the abbreviation is just simply referring to ourselves as the Alliance. Members of the Alliance are the Federation of Diocesan Liturgical Commissions, the National Association for Lay Ministry, which I am with, the National Association for Pastoral Musicians, which Michael is with, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, which I used to be with, and the National Federation of Catholic Youth Ministry. These 5 associations came together really to form a cooperative to pursue certification and national certifications together. Not duplicating efforts, but doing one effort together. While there is times and things that we do apart as associations, together it's a collective effort. Underlying all this, of course, is a 6th association, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. We often don't talk about the Bishops' Conference being a membership association. It is. It's just not a membership association that most of us can join. And the standards and the procedures and the certification are approved by the USCCB CCA, Commission on Accreditation and Certification. So we, as we go forward, we want to just talk about the alliance. I'm going to keep saying Reliance, but when I say alliance, I'm really talking about these partners and these associations. The alliance has a common purpose, approach to creating an approach to assessing competency for ministry for each of the following specialized ministers: Director of Worship, Pastoral Associate, Parish Life Coordinator, which refers to people working under Canon 517.2. If you don't know what that canon is, you're not a Parish Life Coordinator. The Director of Music Ministry, Parish Catechetical Leader, Youth Ministry Leader and the Spanish equivalent, and the Diocesan Youth Ministry Leader. Together, we were looking at the ministry leaders who develop these standards and procedures do so to contribute to the continuing development and formation of men and women who serve the Catholic Church in the United States as lay ecclesial minister. It is a testimony to a powerful shared commitment to the well-prepared and fruitful lay ecclesial ministry. At the heart of all this is the commitment from all these associations to improve ministry in the United States, to improve how people are ministered to, improve how our ministers work with each other, and how our ministers succeed as ministers is the underlying fact. The overall effort, again, is driven towards improving ministry. We have a long history of this, more than 20 years, beginning with in the late 80s when first certification standards were written by the National Federation of Catholic Youth Ministry for youth ministers, and then NALM for pastoral associates, and NCCL for catechetical leaders. Each organization worked separately, keeping each other informed, but it was not a joint effort. The standards and certification efforts from USCCB and other organizations like chaplains and hospital chaplains and prison chaplains go back 40-plus years. So certification isn't new. I think what's different in the late 80s is for the first time you have certification that's not being pressured by an outside agency like a state education department or hospitals that are dealing in an ecumenical culture or prisons which are dealing with state and federal regulations. There was no outside pressure to set standards and competency for ministers. It was internal. In 1999, the 3 organizations tried to formalize their conversations about standards and created a common competency project. This resulted in a book of all the standards being published together, really directed towards people doing education and formation. The result of the Common Competency Project was basically the association saying we should do this together and not separately. The groundwork was laid by the Common Competency Project. The outcome was in 2003 when the common set of national certification standards were published by these 3 organizations, national certification standards, and approved by the USCCB CCA. That represented a major point. For the first time, we were saying that the common competency, 80%, 85%, 90% of what you needed to be an effective lay minister or lay ecclesial minister in the church was the same. There was specialized standards added, the things you needed just to be a youth minister, things added just that you needed just to be a catechetical leader, things you needed just to be a PLC, to be a associate pastor. But the majority of what you needed to know, the basics that we'll talk about a little bit later, were in common. In 2005, NPM joined the effort. creating standards for directors of parish music. Those standards were based on the common competencies with specialized competency, and at which point they joined the Mary group. And we proceeded on talking about what the next revision that was due in 2010 would look like. And then FDLC joined us in 2009 with the goal of adding standards for parish liturgists. We are continuing to work as a group. All our systems now are based on this cooperative effort, and we have continued to proceed as the Alliance. And where are we now? Alliance committees are made up of representatives of these different groups. All 5 Alliance partners have parallel groups within their membership of members who do different activities relating to standards for those particular ministries they're responsible for. All 5 organizations approved the standards in 2011. The Alliance standards and procedures were approved by the USCCB Commission on Certification and Accreditation. And last May, the first applications were accepted for the first round of certification. And we have a number of people who have moved into candidacy, which is the second phase. And hopefully in the coming year, we will actually have our first people nationally certified. There was certifications by diocese and previously that were approved by USCCB. Their certification continues, and it's not related to national certification at this point. The big change you've seen since 2003 and the new standards is the standards have been realigned. They've been realigned to parallel the 4 pillars of the formation documents, the directory for formation of Roman Catholic priests and the directory for the formation of permanent deacons. They used those 4 common pillars. The bishops decided to use those 4 common pillars when they wrote co-workers, and the 4 areas in co-workers have become the 4 standards. Standard 1, human formation. Standard 2, spiritual formation. Standard 3, intellectual formation. And 4th, pastoral formation. Those are the core of the standards. The thing to remember when working with the standards is the standards and co-workers are meant to go hand in hand. And we almost mean that literally. When you're working with the standards and you're working with co-workers, you almost have to have both documents open on your desk. The standards are trying to bring out what's in co-workers into a more measurable, more practical piece. But the philosophical underlying for all the standards you can be found in co-workers. So it's really trying to have one document relate to the other directly and move forward. Okay. And we'll look at the individual standards a little bit more closely. Standard 1 is the human. Lay ecclesial ministers demonstrate the qualities of human maturity needed for faithful ministry with the people of God. This is the very personal. This is about being a person, about being a mature person. These are the standards that relate to all the good qualities that we expect in a person and the maturity we expect in a minister. Standard 2 is sharing the common priesthood of all the baptized. Lay ecclesial ministers demonstrates Christian spirituality as foundational to ministry, integrated in service with the people of God, and possessing a sacramental view of the world that recognizes the world can be a vessel of God's presence and God's transforming grace. The second standard overlays on top of the first standard, taking basically the personal part and laying the baptismal Christian Catholic part on top of that. It talks about the fact that you need a spirituality to be an effective minister. You need a spirituality to survive ministry. You need a spirituality to survive being a Christian. And all those areas are covered in the second standard. Standard 3 is the one most people jump to when they think about standards. It's the intellectual. A lay ecclesial minister demonstrates an understanding of the breadth of Catholic theological pastoral studies as well as intellectual skills to use that knowledge in ministry with God's people from diverse populations and cultures. This is the facts and figures standards, the things you should know. One of the joys in Roman Catholicism and our history and ministry, we have enjoyed a well-educated intellectual tradition of clergy and religious as the basis for which lay ecclesial ministry is based. In the United States, amongst all Christian pastors, there's an expectation of theological and intellectual knowledge that goes beyond just facts and figures to truly being an intellectual person. It's the fact that we have professional degrees in ministry that is reflected in the intellectual piece. So the intellectual piece is a fourth of it, but it's often the piece that people think of most. And number 4 is the pastoral. Lay ecclesial ministers demonstrate a full range of leadership and pastoral skills needed for functioning effectively in ministry. This is the idea of what I know, what I believe, what I pray has got to be able to relate to other people. This is the light under the bushel standard. You can't share your light if it's under a bushel. How well do you share your light? How well do you share your knowledge? How well do you communicate with people? This is the standard that is based on practical theology, pastoral theology, all those efforts where we really talk about how we minister to people and how we offer our beliefs and our beliefs, our spirituality, and our feelings in a productive and professional way. Together, these 4 standards create an overview of basically what we need to be in ministry. They are broken down within the standards into subcategories. There's the core standards we just listed. Next is the core competencies, and we use the competency language more so than you would think. And it's funny, today on the news and here in D.C., they were talking about one of the local school districts getting away from A's, A, B's, and C's, and when I quickly looked at the headlines, the first replacing A was going to be ES, and I thought, exceed standards. They're doing the same thing we were, but that's not what it meant. It was much more complicated than that. So I was a little disappointed, but that idea that competencies, you display competencies in terms of what you can do and what you know. Each of the categories have a set number of competencies, a set number of areas, subsections that break out the standards. Many of them directly parallel the co-workers, and all of them do in some way. Some of them are just really easy to see. All of them relate. There's one change you're going to see from the previous standards for those who worked with the previous standards. The previous standards had 5 standards and not 4, and that change was made to correspond with co-workers now, but the competencies are all still there that were in the old standards. So if you were working with a certification process based on the old standards and old core competencies, they're all still there. They might have been reworded to make a little bit more measurable. They might have been reworked to make them a little bit more complete, but they're all still there. They've just been reorganized from 5 categories to 4. Within the standards, you're going to find the specialized competencies. These are the competencies that only apply to a particular ministry. If you remember going back to our list of ministries, pastoral associates, DREs, music directors, youth ministers, parish liturgists, you'll see that there's going to be things that you really need to know to work in those fields. That across the board, there is no certification for generic lay ecclesial minister. All the certification is for specialized ministers. And the difference between the specialized ministers and each category is really the competencies being demonstrated in these specialized competencies. But going back to what I said earlier, remember the majority of the standards are all based on the core competencies. So the majority of what we need to know is found in common We realize that today that there's a lot more slashers, people that do 2 or 3 things and they move from place to place. They don't necessarily enter as a DRE and stay a DRE for their whole ministerial career. They could end up in youth ministry, they can end up in a DRE and then back to youth ministry and then into a different thing altogether and then back into one of their earlier parish ministries. That's the good part about the core competencies, because you're always covering the majority of the competency through the core competencies. Within the standards, which you can find all the standards for free online at the Alliance website, lemcertification.org, you can are the indicators. And the indicators are great, and yet they're one of the most misunderstood based on the phone calls that I get from people and the feedback that I've gotten from my members. The indicators were given to you and given to us as examples of how competencies are demonstrated. It's the how things are doing. People, under the spirituality, there's a lot. People have a devotion of the rosary. People say the rosary. People go to Mass daily. People make holy hours. They're all indicators. The wrong approach on indicators is to use them as a checklist. It's not a complete list. It's not meant to be a complete list. It's meant to just be examples. You can have your own indicators, and if you're doing the certification process, which Michael will talk later, you're going to decide on your own indicators, and you have to decide which of the sample ones relate to us, or maybe you rewrite them all, and they don't necessarily apply the way we worded them to you. But the indicators are there as examples. It is not a checklist mentality. You'll make yourself crazy if you try to use the indicators as the checklist of all the things I need to do, particularly like in the spirituality or theology sections, of all the things I need to do to become certified. It's just not the way that they were intended to be used at all. So, and Jared, I was going to do the poll one slide back, and I forgot. So let's take a second to do the poll now.
Sure. Let me pull it up for you. Okay, you should see on your screens the question, which of the 4 new standards is your strongest? We'll give you a few seconds here to respond by clicking on one of the buttons. Good, and we're seeing some responses coming in. We'll give it about 10 more seconds to respond. Which of the 4 new standards is your strongest?
I meant to have Michael organize music for the poll, but I forgot to tell him. I wanted you to do the singing. That's right. You asked me to do the singing, but I spared us all by not doing the singer because there are no indicators that I could meet in the singing section.
That's a specialized competency.
One thing while we were taking the poll, I can mention NPM has had standards and certification for other ministries prior to joining the certification standards and continue to have performance, or not performance, but leading certifications that while we were doing this, we learned a great deal about how to measure things when talking about it from our friends at NPM. So it's been a great 6-7 year experience of trying to build common competencies as a group. So.
Okay, well I'll close the poll now. Okay. Here are the results. Can you guys see them on your screen? Would you like to talk about them a little bit?
We can't see them on our screen.
Yeah, we're not seeing them on our
Okay. Everybody else should see the responses. It looks like we have 16% for Standard 1, human formation, 26% spiritual formation, the largest intellectual formation at 30%, and then the second place response was pastoral formation, Standard 4.
Okay.
Okay, back to your presentation.
Was the first one 60, did you say, Jared?
16, sorry. So human formation was the lowest at 16%.
What does that say?
Yeah.
I was going to go ahead and do another poll and ask the flip side, but I don't think, actually I'm pretty happy with that balance. Charlotte McCorkadale has done this poll in some of the webinars she's done with us and for the Alliance and relating to standards. And so far, the intellectual always seems to pop up as first, and yet, so often what we talk about when we talk about lay ecclesial ministry is the function first, which would be the fourth. And of course, I always want to talk about the first two in terms of the person of the minister. So it's interesting to see that. And on that note, I'm going to take the chance to go ahead and pass on to Michael for the next section.
Well, thanks, Chris. That's a good segue, actually. We're going to ask what it means to be certified. Before we get into that, I do want to echo what you were just saying a moment ago about what an experience it's been for the 5 organizations to work together on this project and to kind of reflect together on what it means to be certified, what constitutes competence for ministry, and to learn from one another. The various organizations each bring different kinds of strengths to the table, and unlike in some pastoral situations where the ministers have a hard time understanding each other and working together, this has been a really, really positive experience where the different cultures and the different approaches have greatly enriched the product. So it's something I'm really grateful for. So we're going to pick up with asking what it means to be certified. And you heard Chris speak a moment ago about the core standards, the core competencies, and the specialized competencies. And those three aspects of our project really undergird the definition of what it means to be certified. I think we can define competence for a particular lay ecclesial ministry in a way that can be demonstrated. And that is really the key to understanding how one relates the standards, core competencies, and specialized competencies to certification. It's by way of demonstrating one's competence for each of those areas, for each standard, for each competency. So that's the heart of certification, a judgment that a person has demonstrated his or her competence and is thus qualified for that particular ministry. I think it's also worth noting what Chris said earlier about we don't certify for lay ecclesial ministry generically, but only for a particular lay ecclesial ministry, even though most of what makes someone competent for a particular ministry is something we share in common across ministries. I think it's worth also noting that certification is distinct from authorization, which is the role of the diocesan bishop. By saying that someone is certified, we're not thereby saying that that person is authorized for ministry. This distinction also comes from co-workers, which lays out the various aspects of lay ecclesial ministry in a theoretical kind of way. And this project really helped us to see where the rubber hits the road on these aspects. As professional organizations and as an alliance of professional organizations, we certainly possess the ability to make a determination about whether or not someone is qualified for ministry by virtue of their demonstrating competence. But authorization for ministry is an ecclesial act, and that belongs to the diocesan bishop. So who certifies? It's the alliance and its member organizations that are the certifying organizations. And in doing so, we do that with the approval of the USCCB Commission on Certification and Accreditation. Now, here are some other distinctions that I think are really important for us to understand when we talk about certification. As we just said, certification is the process whereby a person demonstrates compliance with standards for professional competence. They demonstrate compliance. Accreditation is is a process whereby a duly constituted accrediting body gives recognition to education and or service center programs which meet established standards. So, for example, a university or a high school or even elementary school will look to an accrediting agency, like here in this region we have Middle States, which surrounds your institution and makes sure that your academic institution is in compliance with the educational standards that are accepted within the field. And you know what a grueling process that can be. That's accreditation. That is something that happens to an institution, where certification happens to a person. A certificate is also distinct from certification. A certificate is a statement that a program or a course of studies has been completed through attendance, participation, or fulfillment of requirements. And here at NPM, we have a number of certificate programs. We have 3 different certificates for organists. We have 3 different certificates for cantors. And all of those are simply statements that the person has completed certain requirements, but is not certification. It is not a demonstration of competence for ministry, which the organization will stand behind to say the person is qualified for employment, merely that they've completed the requirements for that particular certificate. Oh, we checked all those off, right? There we go. Okay. Now, we're going to talk next about the certification portfolio. At the heart of the Alliance certification process is the portfolio. I'm going to speak about it briefly right now, and I'm going to return to it later when we walk through the whole process. The certification portfolio is a collection of documents assembled by the candidate that provides various types of evidence of one's competence for a particular lay ecclesial ministry. That portfolio is based on the national certification standards for lay ecclesial ministers, that is the standards, the core competencies, and the specialized competencies. And it includes several different ways by which the candidate demonstrates his or her competence. For example, portfolio includes testimony, that is assessments by the candidate, by his or her supervisor, by a peer in ministry, and a subordinate. So testimony. Second, evidence of successful academic study. So we look for study in theology, pastoral ministry, and other fields appropriate to each ministry. That could be by way of transcripts or course descriptions, and if not by coursework, by other methods or equivalencies that manifest competence in those areas of study. I'll say more about that shortly. Another aspect of the portfolio would be a demonstration of ability in one's particular ministerial specialization. So it might be a project in ministry, or a program description, or for musicians, a recital. Another aspect of the portfolio would be an integration paper that shows the candidate's ability to approach ministry in a way that includes one's personal, spiritual, intellectual, pastoral, and specialized competencies. It's a paper. The task group developed a portfolio structure that includes a number of common elements. And within that common structure, each organization also has some requirements that are unique to that ministry. So, for example, the number of hours required in academic study may vary from ministry to ministry, or the specialized study that someone's required to have in their area may vary depending on the ministry as well. For example, there's no requirement that pastoral associates have degrees in music, so that would be a difference. Now, these are some of the people and groups that you're going to meet if you begin the certification process. Even prior to the ones that are listed here, we have made provision for certification advisors. These are people designated by each organization to assist candidates in the process. They're not mentors in the thoroughgoing and strict sense of that word, because that might prove to be too cumbersome, but simply people who know enough about the process to help people who are going through it to answer their questions and to help them pull together their portfolios. That is strictly optional, depends on the candidate. If the candidate doesn't want or need an advisor, then they may not have to take one. And also, it's really up to the candidate to take the initiative on moving the portfolio forward and not relying on the advisor to be the prodder or the shepherd. Now, the decision makers in the certification process include these 3 groups. The PCRC, as we've come fondly to know it, is the Partner Certification Review Committee. Each of the 5 Alliance partner organizations has established its own PCRC that receives applications, reviews them, and approves them to begin the certification process. The PCRC appoints and monitors the work of certification advisors, and then it receives the portfolios, and when they're prepared, it reviews them, and then formulates a recommendation on completed portfolios of certification candidates. And then the PCRC forwards those recommendations and the portfolios themselves to the next body, the National Certification Review Committee. The NCRC has been established by the Alliance and is made up of 1 representative from each organization, from each of the PCRCs. So from that first group, one member also serves automatically on the NCRC. The NCRC receives the portfolios from the PCRC along with its recommendations, and then it makes its own recommendations based on that and forwards those on to the AC, or the Alliance Commission. Now, just a word about the NCRC. I think one of the reasons it's important for the Alliance is that it assures a certain level of parity among the organizations. It means that there is one group that is looking at all the portfolios from the same perspective, and even though each ministry is unique, our belief in the commonality of the process and the common competencies, I think, has led us to look for a way of evaluating the portfolios also at the national level beyond each of the 5 organizations. Now, the Alliance Commission is actually the governing body of the Alliance. It's made up of the executive directors and one leader, elected leader, usually the certification chair from each of the 5 partner organizations. But in addition to its governance role, the Alliance Commission reviews the recommendations for certification from the NCRC, and it's the AC that ultimately is responsible for granting final approval and granting certification in each of the specialized ministries. So the certification that each candidate receives for their specialized ministry is granted in the name of both the Alliance and of the respective partner organization. Now, there's one body that we did not list on here that's probably important for you to know about as well, and that is the Appeals Panel, which is separate from all 3 of these organizations and has a separate membership for any of the 3 organizations, and is responsible for dealing with grievances, and is actually given the authority to make a final determination in cases where a grievance is filed after a certification may have been denied. So, with all of that preliminary material, let's walk through the lay ecclesial ministry certification process from the perspective of a candidate. So if you are seeking certification as a director of worship, or a pastoral associate, or a parish life coordinator, catechetical leader, a youth ministry leader, including Pastoral Juvenil Hispana, or a director, diocesan youth ministry leader, or a director of music ministries, what's that process likely to look like? The overall process is actually quite simple, although there is an expectation that candidates are going to be held pretty rigorously to the standards and competencies for lay ecclesial ministry. So here it is, 1, 2, 3. First step is application. The candidate goes online and looks at for the application materials for admission to the process. You apply to be admitted as a candidate, and then the PCRC, the Partner Review Certification Committee, has the responsibility for accepting candidates. The second step is the preparation of materials by a candidate. That means putting together the portfolio, perhaps with the assistance of an advisor. And that process may take some time. There may be some holes in the person's competencies that need to be addressed before they can submit a portfolio. And that leads us to the third step, which is submission of documentation for review and the decision regarding certification. That is submitting the portfolio, and that goes to the PCRC to begin the process of review. So that's the process in summary. Now let's look at each step along the way. First step is application, and these are the various components of the application. First are references, a reference from pastor or an equivalent kind of supervisor, and colleagues in ministry, peers in ministry. A ministerial autobiography, that is a paper in which the person tells his or her ministerial story. And the PCRC, the committee, is going to be looking for an ability already to make some kind of integration, to connect the dots, to see that there's evidence already of some competence for ministry along the 4 dimensions that are defined in the standards. Evidence of education and formation, that is transcripts that show that the person has already some formation in the field that makes it likely that they're going to be able to submit a portfolio and achieve certification. Evidence of full communion with the church, that is a baptismal certificate that includes evidence they're baptized, confirmed in full communion with the Catholic Church. Criminal records, and also including evidence of compliance with child protection policies. And finally, the application fee, which is $95 to begin the application process, and which is non-refundable. So when that packet is submitted, then that is submitted to the national office of one's own organization. And the national office staff then will check it for completeness. And if it's complete, send it on to the PCRC, who will act on it. And if it's not complete, it's the job of the staff of each partner organization to inform the applicant, work with the applicant to get the materials that they need to complete their application packet. The chair of each organization's PCRC will arrange for a member of that committee to have an initial conversation with the applicant. That's one step down from a formal interview, but it's an important conversation for the committee to get some sense of the candidate and basically to get a sense of whether or not the applicant is going to be able to complete the process. What the committee is looking for is to help applicants right away to see if they're going to be able to pull together a portfolio, and if not, to give them some advice on maybe taking some more time to get the background they need to do the certification process. Then the PCRC meets together to deliberate, decide on the application, and communicate that decision to the applicant. So that's step one, the application process. The second step is to prepare the materials, that is to develop one's own certification portfolio with the assistance of a mentor, I mean an advisor, I said not a mentor, an advisor if that's going to be helpful. And that portfolio is going to include things like these. The cover letter, which the candidate writes on his or her own, seeking, formally asking for certification. All of the application materials, well that's already done, that was all part of step one. Written assessments. Now this is different from the references that we ask for in the application process. They're more involved, and they mirror the standards, the core competencies, and the specialized competencies. First is a self-assessment, a rather extensive one in which the applicant is asked to evaluate him or herself on each of the standards, on each of the core competencies, and on each of the specialized competencies. This is one of the areas where the indicators can be really, really helpful. As you start to assess yourself on a particular core competency, you can look to the indicators for some suggestions on how to think about your own competency in that particular area. So what Chris said about the indicators, not used as a checklist, but as an aid to help you think about your own competency and looking for indications of it to be able to demonstrate your competence in that particular area. Likewise, you're going to be required to seek testimony from your pastor or equivalent supervisor, from a peer in ministry, and also from a subordinate, someone who has worked under your direction in a pastoral setting. That one is also fairly detailed, but without the same level of detail that's in the self-assessment. In this case, the person giving the testimony is shown the standard and the competencies and is asked in narrative form, can you tell us a little bit about the ways in which this person demonstrates competence under this particular standard? And then, is it your judgment that this person, in fact, is competent in this area? So it's looking at demonstrating competence from the perspective of someone who's actually seen you in action, who's experienced you as a pastoral minister in this particular field. Next is evidence of theological study. And this varies somewhat from ministry to ministry, but for all ministries, there's a minimum of 240 clock hours in 8 core areas of theological study. And you can find more about that online if you look under portfolio requirements. So there's also an allowance that in some ministries people may fall well short of this at the outset, and a requirement that a person must have gained at least 160 clock hours for initial certification and gathered the rest by the time they come back for the renewal in 7 years. Again, that varies from ministry to ministry depending on the kind of lay ecclesial ministry that person is asking certification for. Also is evidence of specialized study. In some fields, there are requirements for study in addition to theological study. Music is a good example of this. Although a master's degree would be preferred in music, any candidate for certification as a Director of Music Ministries must have at least 180 clock hours of musical study at least an undergraduate level, and in certain particular core areas as well. Same thing holds true for youth ministry, where there are some minimum requirements for specialized study beyond theological study. Then there's the demonstration of competence. As I said earlier, that could be a project or some other live demonstration that's done, or a taped demonstration. In the case of music, a lot of people who have gone through graduate programs in music have had to do a jury recital. Well, so that passes for their demonstration of competence in music ministry. And finally, an integration paper in which the candidate really needs to show that they can connect the dots. Not that they just have theological study and that they have this competence and that competence, but that they can use all of them in a focused kind of way. So it's not just about the various components, but also about a fully integrated way of living and serving in ministry. The candidate is asked to address an issue or problem in ministry and to incorporate all areas of ministerial competence in doing so. The integration paper is a way of pulling all of that together. So that's all in part 2, is preparing the portfolio. Step 3 is to submit the portfolio. So the portfolio is gathered, submitted, and then it's reviewed by the PCRC first, and then after its approval goes to the NCRC, the National Certification Review Committee, which consists of representatives of all the Alliance partners. And once they've approved it, it goes on to the Alliance Commission or the AC for final approval. So that really is the process, a simple 3-step process. And one thing I didn't say that I think is just important before we move on to questions is that certification is not for life. That's the thing about a certificate. A certificate you give, and they've got it in their pocket. But certification has to be renewed, in this case, once every 7 years. And there are some requirements for continuing formation and for a renewal of assessment, both by a self-assessment and testimony by others, a supervisor, a peer, and a subordinate for renewal of certification. And I think that is that's ready to turn that over now to Jared for questions.
All right, Mike and Chris, thank you very much for.
Jared.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. We do have some questions that have already come in. If others have a few other questions, if you want to submit them now in the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, please do so. I'll be offering as many as we can. We have about 12 more minutes until 4 o'clock Eastern Time, and we'll try to keep it in that time frame. So first question is about, can you speak a little bit more, Todd asks, can you speak a little bit more about the difference between certification and receiving a certificate?
Yeah, completion of certificate shows that you completed a program, or you passed an exam, or that you have done something, you've accomplished something. Certification is a statement by a certifying organization that you are qualified for a certain professional position, or in this case for a particular lay ecclesial ministry. So they differ very substantially.
Okay, one quick clarification. You mentioned just a minute ago that the 7-year renewal time frame. We have a question about, does the process take 7 years? You want to clarify?
No, our hope is that actually the process could be done rather briefly. I mean, if someone already has the required education and experience, then really pulling together the portfolio should only take them a few months to get their make sure their demonstration is complete, and to get their self-assessment and testimonies lined up. And that's all it really requires, is the submission of a portfolio that demonstrates that you're competent.
I know that NALM, I just today got word that the first of the applications that we received on May 1st and approved, about 30 days later, that the first person feels like they have fulfilled all the portfolio requirements of candidacy. So we're just starting to review that now, but that gives you an idea. I think originally we were thinking that people would have up to a year, but we were thinking people shouldn't be taking it beyond a year. But one of the important things to remember is that one of the difference between a certificate and certification is it is an ongoing process. So it's not like I got my piece of paper and I'm done. It's I've got my certification and now I'm thinking about recertification.
That's really true.
Okay. As far as timing goes, how long does it typically take until the applicants will hear back to know if their materials have been accepted or if they're approved?
There's a requirement, actually, that the PCRCs are to communicate a decision within 30 days after the date of the deadline for receiving them. So there is a requirement there.
Yeah, and I think my experience at NALM right now is that you end up getting a lot of stuff because even with the application, you get a lot of things piecemeal, and it's it's all the requirements are based on when we get the final piece. And often I'm hearing from, the first round, I got many of the pieces before I got an application.
It's probably, we didn't say this earlier, but we have 2 dates in the year where we receive applications and portfolios, 2 deadline points in the year, October 1st and March 1st, or is it April 1st? 6 months, whatever that is. Anyway, is April 1st. So we just passed a deadline yesterday for receiving applications and portfolios, and then we'll have another one in 6 months.
Okay, thanks. We have a bunch of different questions asking about the website. What's that URL again that they can go to find the materials?
Actually, it's on the next slide. There you go.
Okay, there we go. And we also have so there's so many questions coming in, I can't find the person who asked, but is there a book as well that they can get there at that website?
There will be a physical book on paper eventually, but right now all the standards and core competencies and everything that you used to find in the common competency books is available on the website for free. The Alliance made a decision early on that if we really wanted this to take off, that we needed to put all the materials you needed to do the process on the website. So we are going to publish a book, but that's really a convenience because you don't need the book. All the materials that are in the book are already on the website.
Okay, good. We have 2 similar questions here. One, Roberta asks, how does it benefit me? And Michael asks, in pursuing employment, what will the certification mean to an individual parish? Can you address that a little bit, what your visions are?
I think we've always thought about this as a credential. We've always thought about this as this is something you put on your resume to say, not only do I think I'm competent for this position, so does the National Association for Lay Ministry and the Alliance think I'm competent to be a pastoral associate. This is new, folks. There's no immediate recognition. You might be explaining to a pastor or a search committee or whoever what this means. But in the long run, we hope that we're going to build recognition for this. We've got articles coming and other pieces to help increase the profile of this. But what we're hoping is that in some ways, this is a credential that people will be able to use going forward in terms of job thing. But the other piece of it is it's not just about a job. This is also about the national associations wanting to acknowledge the hard work and qualification of many of the professionals in the field. That we're hoping in the long run that this is more of a personal affirmation of you, the minister, for all the work you do and all the things you know, and how confident so many of us, or so many of you, truly are in ministry in terms of actually naming what we think is true already.
If I could just add to that, I think that for our members, one of the reasons to do this is for the future, that it's going to raise the level of ministry in the United States. And while in the short term, it may not mean more money or a better job or more recognition, in the long run, it can mean all of that for the generation to come. And raising the level of the professions and of these ministries is something that I think we can take personal responsibility for as organizations and as individual members of them.
Okay, Mary asked about the $95 application fee. Once that it's paid, if the applicant is found to need more time to fulfill the process, is that a one-time only fee to apply?
No, there's additional fees beyond the 95. That is just a simple application fee. There is a $165 candidacy fee, and then if you don't, if you want to stay in candidacy for more than a year, you have to repay another fee, and that's done as a motivation, not a punishment, to get you moving. Plus, it costs us money to have an open file and have someone working with you all this time. So it's important that when you're ready to do this, that you realize that, yeah, this isn't just something I can do, say I'm a candidate forever. It should have a beginning, a middle, and the end. The finances on this is none of the fees represent what these associations have spent to create these certifications. We have spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars creating the certification process, and maintaining it. The fees really represent a drop in the bucket. But our members have supplemented and underwrote all this because we think it's so important to the profession.
We also have done a lot of research on what the fees are like for certification in other fields, and we find ours are quite a lot less.
Okay, Sylvia asks, can a minister be multi-certified if he or she is involved in two distinct ministries?
Yes, but those would have to be pursued separately and sequentially rather than simultaneously. The good thing about this process is that once you've achieved one, you've done most of the work for the other. So, but they would be separate.
Okay. Evelyn is asking about the. Do you need to include documents, papers in the portfolio, or student reports that show education? Does the portfolio get used for anything other than the review? So, multi-question.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I don't know what else.
I think the first question is just about the format. Is everything mailed in?
We do ask that as much as possible all materials be submitted digitally and uploaded to.
Okay.
We're setting up a site on the LEM certification website that each candidate will be given their own portal, so where they can upload their documents. So we would try as much as possible to do that digitally. In terms of, your question does sort of, I think, also raise the question of how do you demonstrate your intellectual competence. And of course, one way is transcripts, but not everybody has that, and we do have some alternatives for people who want to demonstrate their intellectual competence in other ways, whether through a lecture or a paper or some other way, but it has to be approved by the PCRC. Excuse me.
Okay, that's good. There's a question about that very thing, just whether or not online courses or webinars like this can be used in the portfolios.
Yes, totally. But I like to say you can't learn to play the organ online, and it's true with some theological disciplines too. It's not just a series of workshops. It does mean having a rigorous grasp of particular field, which requires a certain level of study. But it depends.
But with a portfolio-based approach, one of the things it does is let you account for non-traditional educational experiences beyond what would show up on a transcript. So the answer is yes, you have to be able to relate it to how it proves that competency, and that's what integration papers are for and portfolios are for. But the portfolio does give you a chance to be more inclusive in terms of what educated you than just the transcript ever could.
Okay, David is enrolled in a Master's of Pastoral Ministry program at Loyola University in New Orleans. When should he begin the application process?
One of the things we didn't say in the application is that you have to have I think 3 years of full-time experience in ministry in order to apply. So if he has those, and it looks like he's got all of his academic stuff under his belt, and and is actually working in ministry right now and has the ability to be evaluated by a supervisor and a peer and a subordinate. You know, if he's got all those things in place, then he's probably ready to go. But in the meantime, if he's doesn't have all that in place, he can use what we have here as a sort of a barometer of what he ought to be developing so that he can work towards certification. And I think even more than achieving certification, this is all, I think these organizations have come up with a way of saying, what do we think constitutes competence for ministry? And these fulfillment of these requirements is not just a matter of a lot of hoops to jump through, but really a collection of criteria for what it means to be a competent lay ecclesial minister.
We have a few questions about specific ministries, and I'll give you 3 titles. One is Young Adults, the other is Pastoral Associate, and the other is Director of Administration of Parishes. Do any of those 3 roles apply to the standards in certification?
Right now, Pastoral Associates is a certification being done by NALM, and it's meant to be an inclusive piece. And I think people should realize we're using all these terms. You don't necessarily have to have the title that you're being certified for. You have to have the role. There's a difference. It's about capital letters and small case letters. So Pastoral Associates with a small p, a small a, catechetical leader with a small, you could be a catechetical leader, be a DRE, or one of the 17 titles they use for that. Pastoral life, parish life coordinators, there's only 540 in the country, and I know there's 27 titles being used by dioceses. So it's not the titles, it's the role, folks. So just think about it in terms of what role you have and not the titles. In terms of ministries not covered, business managers, social concerns ministers, young adults, we've run into 2 things with that. First, you know, some of us think there should be other ministries covered, but the association to support that hasn't come forward or hasn't been developed, or at NALM, the members within the association hasn't come forward to ask for that. And then the other one is this isn't the place to invent parish ministries. This is the place to name what we're doing already and create competencies for proven ministry. So it can't be like a new creative thing. We have the statistics. We know how many people are doing what roles, and we've covered the top 5 right now. And you know, business managers, if you count them as ministers, and some people do and some people don't, so it's hard to count them. And then the next big one would be social concerns ministers. Young adults, some of the other things, volunteer coordinators, family life directors, they're statistically much less. It's much harder to create a certification when you don't have a base group that you're creating it for.
Thank you both. We're going to wrap things up because we're getting a little bit past our time here. So thank you all for your questions. A number of people have more additional questions, and I apologize we're not able to get to in the time that we have. And thank you both for your time and expertise in this process, and I wish there were more questions or more time for you to answer the questions.
Thank you, Jared. It was nice to be here.
Thank you, everybody.
And we will have this webinar is being recorded, so we will be sharing it with you via email later on this week. And if you'd like to bookmark this webpage, avemariapress.com/webinar-videos for all the recordings of past webinars. Today's webinar will be posted there later this week. Before we sign off, I'd just like to thank our partners at the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils once again for their partnership in this series. If you're not familiar with their organizations, please go check out their websites and Facebook pages. Mark your calendars for the next webinar in the Professional Development Webinar Series. On Tuesday, October 9th, Sarah Reinhardt, author of the recently released book, A Catholic Mother's Companion to Pregnancy, will share some insights on how to support mothers in a parish environment. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next Tuesday.